I love horror movies, so I feel I should be punished for what I'm going to admit right now. But until about 2 weeks ago, I hadn't ever seen the original Scream movie. You know, the movie with all the screaming. Yeah, well, I hadn't seen that, and let me tell you, there is in fact a lot of, screaming in that movie. Anyway, I loved it. It's a fantastic horror slasher film. It's a masterful blend of self-aware satire and genuinely hair-raising and frightening horror. The actors and crew always say they couldn't have known this movie would be such a hit, but according to Wes Craven, the director himself, the original screenplay by Kevin Williamson was in a huge bidding war in Hollywood, so it was basically set up for greatness, and boy, let me tell you, they were definitely onto something with this movie. The movie was originally titled Scary Movie, and yes, I know, kinda makes the parody movie Scary Movie seem a bit silly for recycling the original movie's own joke. Alas, the title was later changed to Scream, which I assume had to do with the fact that the ghost face mask closely resembles the Scream painting by Edvard Munch, and of course it's what most of the characters do throughout the film. The title Scary Movie does tell us a little more about the style of the movie though. This movie, although full of scary moments, is largely a satire of prior campy horror flicks. All the characters have seen horror films and act accordingly, which adds this layer of complexity to the scenario. The concept of the movie was to subvert the expectations of horror enjoyers and throw the cliche back at them. The movie does this masterfully, and it does this best in its opening scene. That opening scene really sticks with me. It's incredible, and today I wanted to climb up onto that 5-meter tower and deep dive into this opening scene. Not the 10-meter tower though, that's too high and scary. Note that there are only spoilers for the opening scene in this video, which roughly entails the first 12 minutes of the film. So if you haven't seen those yet, I've linked the opening scene in the description. Alrighty tidy, here we go. After the extremely campy opening title card, we are introduced to a ringing phone, emphasis being put onto it with a close-up, showing us this phone will become important to the story. We are then introduced to our protagonist, Casey Becker, who is played by none other than Drew Barrymore. Casey is alone in a big house at night, which immediately brings up that specific horror cliche and makes us think that she will be the victim of whatever is about to happen. When Casey hangs up the phone here after talking with the mysterious voice, notice how the camera stops moving with Casey and is glued to the window, facing outside, as if someone may be out there lurking, watching her. We then cut to a shot of a swing moving outside. Could be the wind, but maybe not. This is not only unnerving, it also frames the house in its setting, making us aware how isolated it is, and also sets up foreshadowing for the end of the scene with Casey hanging from the tree. The popcorn on the stove is a clever way to create a sort of expanding clock which sets up tension as it builds up from normal expansion to, as Wes Craven puts it, overkill. When the voice on the phone asks, "Do you like scary movies?" it kinda plays on that humor and parody aspect I mentioned earlier. Casey, while answering the voice on the phone, fidgets with a kitchen knife, which plays the famous knife/1.mp3 audio cue, which not only establishes the themes of the film, it also foreshadows her death. Yet also is a Chekhov's gun for her when she later takes said knife to defend herself. She's toying with it the same way the killer is toying with her life. As the popcorn grows and the tension slowly builds, we get a neat little Easter egg where Casey and the voice are talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was also directed by Wes Craven. It's actually quite funny because these lines were in the screenplay before they knew Wes Craven was going to direct. Casey mentions how the original movie is good, but the sequels suck, which is objectively true. I watched some of them as preparation for this video. However, Craven, kinda just realizing how mental the name Craven is. Anyway, Craven wanted the line removed because he thought it seemed pretentious because he had not directed the sequels. However, Williamson reminded him he had in fact directed the 7th entry in the franchise, which according to them both also sucks, so they kept the line in. Aside from the Easter egg aspect, it's our first taste of the movie's self-referential dialogue, which tells us that horror films do in fact exist in this movie, and that the characters have seen them. So it raises the question for the viewer, if these kids have seen all the cliche horror movies, they wouldn't act stupid. So how would these kids act if they got a call in the middle of the night in a house out in nowhere? It makes you think. Seeing Casey look at the door while calmly talking to the voice on the phone shows that she is in fact not stupid and she's slightly wary of the voice, so it gives us a sense of security, even though the house is basically made from only glass. I mean, what's a lock going to do? Keep the rocks out? When the voice says, "I want to know who I'm looking at," it throws the viewer into a sense of panic. Those prior shots looking out and into the house, they pay off now. Was there someone outside? It makes you wonder if you missed something. Maybe another person is visible in those shots from before. It's incredibly unnerving. It makes you second guess the safety you had felt before, especially when the audio cue of the barking dog plays, implying someone sneaking outside may have disturbed it. This scene in particular is an homage to the 1979 movie When a Stranger Calls, which has a babysitter dealing with a caller threatening the kids she's sitting, only to then realize the call is coming from within the house. We are put into a POV shot as Casey turns on the porch light and looks outside. Not only does this put us into her shoes, it also sets up the porch light as a sort of safety light, which of course gets thrown right back at us later. The parallel montage of the interjected popcorn shots thrown in here and there always keep us on our toes. The ringing phone represents danger now, a sort of extension of the killer, intruding into her privacy, her secure home. It makes me flinch every time it starts ringing again. Horror movies used to and usually use shadows as a way to represent the evil influence of monsters and killers. We see this in old movies such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or Nosferatu, and newer movies like The Babadook and Insidious. The evil is represented by shadow, and we see hands get distorted into evil twisted shapes or monsters melting into the unknown. Darkness has always played a role in extending evil on our screens. It's evil's best ally, and what this movie does so cleverly is create a new way of evil to get extended and for it to dominate, not just through clever use of sound like the ringing of the phone, but also by establishing that voices are not safe. Phones, which are often the safety prop in horror movies, are no longer on our side. It's so incredibly ingenious. The killer is no longer restricted to hiding in the shadowy night outside her house. He can infiltrate her safety whenever he wants, and that is horrifying. Now Casey raises her voice at the killer, trying to assert herself. However, she immediately gets interrupted by his loud, snarling voice. She has lost all sort of control over the situation. The power dynamic has now completely shifted into his favor. What is also spine-chilling is how he says Blondie, which is our final clue that he can in fact see her and is in fact outside. No more doubt about it. Interesting to note is that Craven never had Drew Barrymore see the voice behind the phone, Roger Jackson. He thought it more authentic to not have her see him in order to not humanize the voice, which ended up making it all the more terrifying for her, I imagine. After realizing that the person on the phone can definitely see her, she sprints through the house, locking all the doors. This parallels when she calmly locked some earlier. She is no longer calm, she is panicked and afraid. Again, not quite sure what the locks are for. I can see more glass walls than normal walls here. Regardless, the frantic motion mixed with the intense score makes us extremely anxious and adds even more tension to the scene. When Casey looks outside, the camera is facing inwards, framing her head within these square windows in the door, making her look trapped, almost as if in a cell. The killer having told her he'd gut her like a fish makes even more sense now. She's trapped in a glass prison like an aquarium. The doorbell jump scare ensues, and Casey asks the infamous horror victim question of who's there. Oh man, what a cliche. She should know not to do that. That's a death sentence. Holy fuck, that fucking phone, I swear to God. Ironically, the killer reminds her of this too, mocking her for asking the question, which again is quite humorous and self-aware. Casey, throughout her panicked behavior within the scene, still tries her best to throw curveballs at the killer, which she really shouldn't be doing. She could break one of the 1,000 windows, but she always tries to intimidate him, to no avail. Cops are too far away, but what about her boyfriend? He's on his way, she tells the voice. The audience can relax a little now. Apparently he plays football, big strong Chad man, she explains. Well, I may be paraphrasing a little. Anyway, a big football man will come and beat the shit out of this prankster. So when I watched this for the first time, I was honestly pretty sure he would come and help her or something. But I was just as shocked as Casey when the voice revealed her boyfriend's name. He is intelligent, not to be underestimated. He has clearly thought of everything. Nothing Casey will do could possibly catch him off guard. It's terrifying. Turn on the porch lights, now being where those safety lights get turned right back around on us and burn themselves into our retinas. Steve is sitting tied up in a chair. Casey now has to play a game or Steve gets killed. Of course, the game is a horror movie trivia quiz. As panicked as Casey is here, she indulges. Since we have established that Casey is an avid horror movie enjoyer, we feel a sense of relief when we find out the quiz is about horror movies. Yet here's where we get struck with another subversion. She gets asked who the killer in Halloween is, which she obviously knows since it's her favorite. And the second one seems just as easy. Who's the killer in the original Friday the 13th? She thinks she knows this, but it's a trick question. This was an intentional decision by Williamson and Craven to throw off horror fans and make them wonder if they would have messed up under pressure like Casey did. Another interesting thing about Drew Barrymore's acting in the scene is that she had told Craven about a news article talking about an owner setting their dog on fire, and that had deeply disturbed her being an animal lover herself. So whenever Craven needed her to get into the headspace of Casey in the scene, he would sadistically remind her of that news article and say, "Drew, I'm lighting the lighter," to get the most genuine emotion out of her, which is fucking nuts. Back to the scene though. After Steve gets gutted, the final quiz question asked is, "What door am I at?" Which obviously can't be answered by Casey. A chair slams through the window, which works I guess, but I feel a rock would have worked too. Anyway, good job locking the house, Casey. The chair removes our final barrier of safety, if you can call glass doors safety. Note that we still haven't seen the killer. We don't know what he looks like, and given all the torment Casey has gone through already, we don't want to imagine what he can do once he's inside the house. Casey runs off to the kitchen and grabs her knife, and our trusty MP3 sound plays again. In Casey's POV, we see a dark shadow run through the hallway. Reacting to this, she backs up into a corner, which we all know is a death sentence. We expect to see the killer sneak up on her, but he doesn't. We are reminded again this isn't our usual cliche horror film. Once outside, Casey sees an approaching car. Hope is near. The music tenses to accommodate our hope of her survival. She only needs to wait a little longer. She sees the killer roaming inside, the popcorn burning. Timer obviously expired. It's overkill. Now the perspectives are completely flipped. Casey outside looking in on the killer. Given how the scene has played out so far, being outside looking in should give her an upper hand. We think the power dynamic has shifted in her favor. We see the killer's back from her POV. He can't see her until he rapidly turns and scares her. He is always one step ahead. He is always in control. We finally see the ghost face, prompting us to think of the painting and scream. There's this beautiful shot of Casey screaming and the reflection of the ghost face in the glass, as if comparing their expressions. The killer smashes the glass and grabs Casey, yet she manages to hit him with her phone, the phone she still has firmly grasped in her hand. She starts running away past Steve's corpse and around the house until she can see the car. Suddenly we hear glass shatter and Ghostface tackles her to the ground. The combination of the music, the screaming, the loud crash, and the context of her being so close to safety make this a real butt clencher. I want to note that because I'm such a nerd, I watched the breakdown of the characters' locations throughout the entire scene, and the guy who made this video mapped out the entire house, Casey's location, and the killer's location, and there isn't actually a window he could have jumped through here. Given there's no visible glass, we can assume this is some kind of ADR to add more shock to his tackle. It works really well, and it makes me wonder how often a jump scare is accentuated by random noises that have no reason to be there except to add shock for the viewer. As she's crawling away, she actually manages to exert power over him and kick him away, even after being stabbed. This is so unconventional for a horror film, to show the killer as a vulnerable person, just an average human. And to be fair, in other movies this wouldn't work. If Jason, Michael, or Freddy were just some average build person he could kick or headbutt, they would not be intimidating. This movie flips this convention to the complete opposite. It tells us that the fact that we can tell this killer is just a normal person means anyone could be the killer. You could be the killer. I could be the killer. The neighbor's cat could be the killer. It's one of the most poignant aspects of this film. The killer isn't one singular entity. It could be anyone. This is also why they can make infinite Scream movies and always have the mystery be intriguing. Because as much as these are horror movies, they're also mystery movies. It's that classic Scooby-Doo charm, just in this case a little more R-rated. This movie tries to give us all the possible hope that Casey might survive. She is framed as a protagonist. She's the cover of the movie, played by Drew Barrymore. She has gravity. She has wit. She's a compelling main character to take down this killer. In any average horror movie, she would be, but not here. She manages to overpower the killer while mortally wounded. She's within speaking distance of her parents. We think she will make it. Of course we do. Why else did we watch her for the past 10 minutes? Not only is she killed moments before safety, meters away from her parents, she was replaced in the rest of the movie by an actress who wasn't well known. This was her first main role. She was replaced by an ordinary person, because this isn't Halloween. This isn't buffed up immortal monster versus Jamie Lee Curtis. This isn't Arnold Schwarzenegger versus Linda Hamilton. This is your neighbor versus my brother's friend. This is the street vendor at the corner versus the florist down the street. This is the genius of Scream, the genius of this opening scene. This isn't horror happening in Hollywood. It's horror happening in your neighborhood. So you lock those doors, and when that phone rings, you better get ready to scream. As Casey lies dying in a puddle of her own blood, she manages to pull the mask off the killer and see a familiar face. But who? She gets dragged away, still clenching the phone in her hand, her parents' voices echoing through it, the last tenuous contact between parent and child. Where the swing once swayed in the night breeze now swings Casey, as her parents and the audience are reminded one last time to scream. Well, that was depressing, but we're finally done. I hope my dreams of making an analysis video longer than the actual scene have come true, and I hope you learned a new appreciation for one of the best scenes in a horror movie I've ever seen. There are even more things to discover when watching the entire film. This depth of analysis is not exclusive to the opening. The whole movie is masterful, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. There's some fun little details in the opening that hint at things that happen later in the film too, which I didn't want to spoil. I hope you guys enjoyed this more in-depth analysis. Let me know if you found any more details I missed. I'm happy to discuss those with you in the comments. Conocedor Sam out.